The point of the graph is to show you how much acreage is devoted to just 3 different categories: grains, oilseeds, and hay, sort of the cheap commodity crops that are used for animal feed or processed foods. Only 1.1% of our farmland is used for growing vegetables and fruits. And just to add to what I said on the last slide, about 1% of our food is dedicated to growing fruits and vegetables, most of it to commodity crops. We in the US feed roughly 39 million cows or calves a year. Feed and raise 39 million cows a year for slaughter, for human consumption products. You could probably feed 500 million people with that. Population problem. And so we have a paradox in our food system. Worldwide, nearly 1 billion people are undernourished, facing some form of malnutrition or not enough food. These are usually the people that are rural and dependent on agriculture, like the villagers we saw in the Legacy of Malthus film in India. And paradoxically, another 1 billion people globally are obese. It cuts across class lines. And so the obesity can fall on all sides of the social ladder, but poorer people in rich countries tend to be relatively more obese compared to well-off people. And that's because it's the unhealthy food that's cheaper. If you're low income, if you have a limited amount of money to spend, what are you going to choose to fill yourself up and your family? $1 gets you 1,200 calories of chips, but only 250 calories of carrots. Right? $1 will get you 200 calories of fruit juice, but 900 calories of soda. And so if you have limited money, limited resources, and you and your family need to eat, it's not really much of a choice, right? There are a lot of health problems with the current food system. In 2012, there were more than 1.46 billion overweight adults, and at least 500 million of them were obese. This is from the World Health Organization. In Japan, about 1 in every 20 adult women is obese, compared to 1 in 4 in Jordan, and 1 in 3 in the US and Mexico, and up to 7 in 10 in Tonga. Do we need more food production? Do we have a population problem? Monocropping and the Green Revolution, the way we do farming and what we think of as farming today, has lots of social and environmental problems. And so just to sort of recap some of those. First of all, groundwater contamination through nitrogen runoff, chemicals, fertilizers, and other pesticides and herbicides that we use on our plants, that has to go somewhere. A lot of farmers will use 2 times as much fertilizer as recommended as they need, just to sort of play it safe. Well, if the plants don't absorb that nitrogen, it has to go somewhere. It goes into the soil, into the groundwater table, into these hypoxic zones the size of New Jersey and the Gulf of Mexico. Industrial farming also causes a huge increase in the release of greenhouse gases, atmospheric nitrogen, methane from animal agriculture, but also just CO2 from electricity and other energy inputs we're using in our machinery, in our production of fertilizer, etc. Monocropping also results in a loss of crop diversity. It makes ecosystems less resilient and more vulnerable to climate and pest fluctuations. The way you can sort of think of that is, well, to take the COVID virus, for example, one reason it's such a concern for public health is the coronavirus is a novel virus, meaning humans have never been exposed to it before. It's evolved, it's new. On that note, it's thought to be a zoonotic disease, meaning it probably jumped from animals to humans, possibly in a market in Wuhan. This has happened throughout human history, zoonotic diseases, but it wasn't until we had large sedentary populations, such as with the agricultural revolution and especially the industrial revolution, where we crowded people into these dense urban areas. It wasn't until then that these zoonotic diseases could turn into widespread epidemics or plagues or pandemics. Okay, and so one of the reasons it's such a concern is because no one in the human population has immunity to it, and so we're all vulnerable to it. Same thing in a ecosystem. Ecosystems are naturally diverse and resilient, and there's multiple species with overlapping ecological niches to fertilize the soil, to recycle waste, etc. And so if a climate shift comes along or a locust swarm comes along, parts of the ecosystem, in the naturally diversified ecosystem, parts will be vulnerable, but other parts will not. When you simplify the ecosystem and you're growing just one or two species, now that entire population in that field is vulnerable to whatever climatic or pest fluctuation might come along. And so that's one of the problems with monocropping as well. Also, eutrophication, a nutrient explosion via fertilizer runoff of our lakes, our streams, and our coastal marine ecosystems, creating these hypoxic dead zones, destroying entire ecosystems. Social consequences. Employment opportunities are down in rural areas. You can't really get a job. It's all riding tractors and spraying. You don't need human labor to do it the way that we do it here in the US in industrial ag. Also, local diets are reduced. You can't eat most of the food coming off the farm. Closest store to some of these places is a half-hour away. The policy, as it stands, benefits larger, richer farmers, these mega farm corporations, and has impoverished many at the same time. And we've exported the Green Revolution to much of the rest of the world. Can we feed the world without destroying it? And what food scientists and others sometimes argue is that, well, we need fertilizer, we need these technologies to produce enough food to feed everyone. So is that true? Can we feed the world without destroying it? Are there alternatives to what we're doing? And we'll get into some shortly. In the 1960s, and really all you want to know about this, I just wanted to point out, it was in the 1960s, we exported our economic development, our new technology for industrial farming, the Green Revolution, fertilizer and hybrid seed, to the rest of the world as part of economic aid and development projects. And instead of growing things that naturally grew in these areas, for example, we'll look at a case study in Bali, Indonesia, where they exported the Green Revolution to. And instead of growing the local varieties of rice that naturally grow really well in that environment in Bali, they had everyone switch over to these high-yielding GMOs, these hybrid seeds, varieties of wheat, rice, corn, i.e. maize, that not only require you to buy the seed, but also need chemical fertilizers and herbicides to survive. They also urged farmers in these other regions of the world where they exported the Green Revolution to consolidate, to get big, to centralize so that they can produce more, make more profits, create more economic development, and that will trickle down and benefit the country as a whole. So the theory goes. Surpluses and profit margins were proportional to the size of the farm. So the bigger the farm, the more viable. Those that consolidated did okay. This means that the majority of farmers, that small farmers, lost their viability. And again, the key selling point for why we got people to adopt the Green Revolution: we'll give you money, we'll give you aid, and institute the Green Revolution to grow your economy so you can pay us back and increase livelihood and well-being in your own country. The idea was to generate rural prosperity by having people grow these marketable commodities, and not just grow enough to eat, but also enough to export, right, for profit. Make farmers into business people, create wealth in this way. It was a major problem with tons of longstanding, still relevant consequences today. Again, we'll look at a case study in Bali, Indonesia, where we exported the Green Revolution. Not only did it not work economically for the people, but it has essentially destroyed their ecosystem, which is part of a World Heritage Site, actually. It's so beautiful. We'll talk about that next week. One of the justifications for exporting the Green Revolution to other places is this can help solve the world hunger problem. This info comes from Stone, an article about fallacies in the wars over using GMOs, genetically modified organisms, to solve the hunger problem. And the data, some of the data from the article shows that in 2002, India actually had 41.2 million excess tons of grain. Is that a problem of too many people and not enough food, or maybe people don't have access to that food? For example, India has a surplus of grain, but 250 million people are malnourished, and 1.5 million children die from malnourishment. Is this a Malthusian dilemma, or something else going on? Right? We have a distribution problem, an access problem. Hunger has rarely been associated with overall food shortages. Poverty, lack of access to the resources we need to survive. This is a social condition, and that's what creates hunger and famine. And so just like the Green Revolution has been touted as a solution to the world hunger problem, this is also used to advocate for the use of GMOs, genetically modified organisms. And so GMOs, the pictured here is the glowfish. It's a patented type of zebrafish, comes in different colors. And it was the first genetically modified animal to become publicly available as a pet. And so just to define for you genetically modified organisms, it's an organism whose genetic material has been altered using genetic engineering techniques. One of the main techniques is called recombinant DNA technology. And so you use DNA molecules from different sources, other species or individuals, and then combine that into one molecule to create a new set of genes. The DNA is then transferred into the organism, which gives it a modified gene set. And so GMOs are now the constituents of many of our foods. There's two sides to the argument. One side says they're good, GMOs can solve world hunger and have all these other benefits. The con side questions that and says, really, GMOs are just about profit, and I'll explain why in a moment. And so first of all, before getting into the two sides to the story, GMOs do not necessarily need to be dangerous or problematic. We actually already eat them all the time. Most of the plants that we eat and animals are domesticated, meaning they've already been through this process of domestication, sort of passive artificial selection via humans. And so we already eat genetically modified foods. Our ancestors, as they picked and selected certain crops to plant and regrow, selected for certain traits, and those are present now in the foods we eat today. So it's not so much GMOs are dangerous because they're genetically modified, it's why and how they're created and used that's potentially dangerous or a problem. So the pro side, why GMOs can save the world. And the people that sort of argue this side are the CEO of Monsanto, the food scientists. They play the Malthus card, right? And so they say GMOs can help solve world hunger. You can breed these seeds for all different types of abilities like drought tolerance. You can make them herbicide resistant, which reduces the need for herbicides. Also, by making them herbicide resistant, it kills the weeds without harming the crop, so you don't have to weed. This creates less soil erosion. You can breed them for insect resistance. And so examples are sort of Monsanto videos. We can save the world from world hunger. And so the example I have for you is golden rice. Golden rice is a genetically engineered crop, and it was engineered to biosynthesize beta carotene, which is basically an important precursor to vitamin A. So golden rice was suggested, it produces up to 23 times the amount of beta carotene, which produces vitamin A, as regular rice, the original variety of golden rice. So it could be used in areas where there's vitamin A deficiency, right? This sort of supplement that's naturally built into the crop. That's sort of the pro case. The critics, those that say GMOs are not needed to save the world and may pose serious dangers, sort of environmental activists, social activists. They would say there's potential ecosystem dangers presented by GMOs. There hasn't been that much research. There could be unintended consequences. If we breed seeds to be pesticide and herbicide resistant, you can spray as much as you want into the environment. That has implications for the environment. Also, loss of biodiversity. GMOs might outcompete other species in the natural ecosystem. Furthermore, by monocropping, you're inherently simplifying the ecosystem, making it less resilient. There's health risks potentially. Again, not a lot of research has been done, and critics would also point out that there's a profit motive for GMOs. One motivation for creating them is that people can then patent them as their own intellectual property. So if people want to grow those plants, they have to buy the seed from, say, Monsanto or whatever company selling it. That's kind of a scary thought, because if, for example, a company came to have a patent on all the different seed varieties, people would not be allowed to grow that seed without first purchasing it from a company. The example I have for you of the critics' case is the Terminator gene. So the Terminator gene is a specific genetic sequence inserted into a seed's DNA. Once activated by a synthetic chemical catalyst of the manufacturer's choosing, the sequence renders the seed and crop it produces sterile. It's patented by the USDA and Delta and Pine Land Co., which are now owned by Monsanto. This Terminator technology has no agricultural or economic benefits for farmers or consumers. The only motivation is to protect intellectual property rights according to owners of the technology. They claim it allows them to be able to recover investments on research and produce profits from their technology, as planters must repurchase seeds every year. Opponents claim corporations will only use this to squeeze more money out of dependent farmers and begin a monopoly of chemically saturated suicide seeds. So I have a real-world example for you of genetically modified seeds, modified to be herbicide resistant. Roundup Ready cotton. And the main ingredient in Roundup, glyphosate, is linked to causing cancer. It's pretty much been proven. Monsanto's actually in several court cases right now. They've lost a few of them for several $100 million for causing cancer among individuals that use their products that they told them that they were safe. And so Monsanto developed in 1974, you can see on the slide, Roundup brand agricultural herbicides continue to be a perfect fit with the vision of sustainable agriculture and environmental protection. They don't really go on to say how, but you can feel comfortable using them because they say they're sustainable. So cotton was genetically modified to resist Roundup, this weed killer. The gene that creates this resistance was discovered, cloned, and then transferred into plants like soybeans and corn that we grow as crops. Genetically modified crops have become the norm in the U.S. About 90% or more of our acreage for corn, soy, and cotton is all planted to GMOs, herbicide-resistant GMOs. So Roundup Ready cotton was introduced 20, maybe 30 years ago. With miraculous results. So the way it worked is you plant your cotton, you spray your Roundup all over it. It kills all the weeds, but it doesn't touch your cotton. Then a sort of super weed evolved, pigweed, Palmer amaranth. And pigweed ended up becoming resistant to Roundup. So the Roundup would no longer kill this particular weed when you sprayed it over the cotton ready Roundup crop. But pigweed's a real problem for cotton. Pigweed grows 3 inches a day, and a single plant can release close to 1 million seeds. It's a bully. If you let it grow beside cotton, cotton doesn't stand a chance. And you can sort of see that in the picture, the pigweed growing over the rows of cotton. And so this example is from Georgia. There's 73 different counties in Georgia. And it shows in 2004, only one county, highlighted in red, was identified to have Roundup-resistant Palmer amaranth pigweed. So the weeds growing that the Roundup was no longer killing, which was a real problem for the cotton crop. By 2005, just a year later, this had spread, the weeds had spread to 2 counties, a year later to 7 counties, sort of that teal blue, by 2007 to 11 counties, and so on, so that by 2011, in just 7 years, this Roundup resistant weed had spread from one county to 73. It's basically sort of an arms race between chemicals and superweeds. We'll keep creating new chemicals, but new weeds will continue to evolve to become resistant. And the use of herbicide-resistant crops in the U.S. is high. This is as of 2018. The green shows soybeans, blue, cotton, yellow, corn, and it shows how much of our acreage is planted to herbicide-tolerant seeds, Roundup Ready sort of seeds, if you will. And it's around 90–95%, so almost all. One of the reasons this sort of plateaued is there's not really anything else left to plant with it. We've pretty much planted all our acreage with herbicide-resistant GMOs. And we're having problems. Again, these herbicide-resistant weed populations keep popping up. So the industry's answer is that's okay. We'll just provide new crops, new hybrid seeds with different abilities that are resistant to other types of chemicals that we'll create. And of course, you'll be able to buy the seed and the chemical that goes with it directly from us. Opponents, others would say in the race, there's other ways we can be doing this. Use agroecology methods, for example. And so in relation to Roundup Ready cotton, one alternative to using herbicides is rye planting. The way that this works is you use a cover crop, in this case rye, to block out the weeds instead of spraying chemicals to kill the weeds. And so there was a test conducted where they planted rye in between cotton and soybean rows in the fall, just before the leaf drop. They were doing it actually for soil cover. The researchers discovered after the harvest, though, that the rye wasn't just covering the ground, it was also covering the weed seeds. The rye prevents the seeds, particularly the amaranth, the pigweed, from getting the sunlight they need to germinate. And so when the rye falls down or you chemically burn it down after growing it, it lays down flat and serves as a shield. It prevents sunlight from getting through to the weed seeds. This prevents germination up to about 85%. It works as well as pretty much any weed killer. Pigweed just hates rye. And so the system would be grow a crop of rye, then roll it flat to keep the weeds from growing, but leave some narrow gaps in it, and that's where you plant your cotton or whatever you're growing. And a rye cover crop has two other big benefits. It also prevents wind erosion, soil erosion from cover cropping, and the decomposition of the rye cover crop puts valuable vegetative matter back into the soil, increasing the fertility. And so it could be an important alternative strategy. Instead of creating new chemicals and new GMOs and continuing the arms race, use agroecology methods like cover cropping. Work with what nature, evolution, has already figured out over billions of years and imitate that, mimic it, mimic your agriculture off of ecological principles found in nature.